All right, we have some people still out there. Let them come in, but let's go to in the news tonight. Let me tell you a couple things that are going on. This one came out this week, and it says this: real-time national driver surveillance program coming soon. Listen to this one. A new Senate bill would create a real-time national driver surveillance program that will allow law enforcement to know anything and everything about a driver at the click of a button. Safe Drivers Act is designed for one purpose, and that is to share everything a motorist has ever done and with law enforcement nationwide. It's kind of scary when you think about it. It plans to make it easier to share drivers' personal information with law enforcement across the country, and that's pretty frightening. The ultimate goal of the bill is to help lead to the creation of a national real-time sharing program. Apparently, knowing a driver's social security number, address, date of birth, checking their driving record, and running their name against a national criminal database is not enough. Big Brother's insatiable desire to know everything about everyone. So where's this leading? Well, again, we've been talking a lot about the data that is being collected by for every individual in the United States, and that is not a really exciting thing to think about, because the more government control you have, the less security you have. Even though I think you have security, you don't. Now you're going to be spied on every way you can. Now it may sound good, because it may sound like they're going to catch bad drivers, but in that net again, everyone else is going to have their data being put in there. The ultimate goal of the bill is to help lead to the creation of a national real-time data sharing program. So right now you have departments of transportation in individual states. Very rarely do they share across state lines. This will be able to be internationally or nationally shared at any given time. It says Big Brother's insatiable desire to know everything about everyone is on the rise. The bill would incentivize states into creating a national real-time drivers sharing program. The goal is to incentivize states to modernize their systems and work together to make sure their databases are compatible to improve communication on dangerous drivers. The Department of Transportation would offer states more than $50 million to help create a national real-time data sharing. Also, another $50 million for a competitive grant program, should they desire. So one has to ask, why would states need bribes as grant money to help create a national driver surveillance program? This bill would also give law enforcement real-time alerts on every single driver. So how many of you got an Amber Alert last week? Yeah. Well, this would be a bad driver alert. Can you imagine that? And so basically they'd be pushing people, they'd be putting an Amber Alert for a bad driver alert. And that sounds like it's going to take care of all those bad drivers, but again, it's going to catch every single person. And what the police can do is this: if you have a little minor traffic accident, they can push a button once this is enforced, and they can take up in video time every accident you've ever had, because most of the accidents are captured on cameras. And so all that would go into the database, and they'd be able to take up your entire history. How many of you don't want your history as your driver history taken up? I don't. I know where I've been, and I know what I've done, and I don't want it coming up. HR 45, and that would prejudice the policemen, by the way, when they're at the scene of a crime, because if somebody didn't have an accident, and this is their first one, and you've had 3, they may side with them, even though it may have been their fault. So HR 4531 would also give law enforcement access to videos of accidents a driver was involved in, and much, much more. Let me give you another one, a pretty hot subject right now. How have you been following about the NBA in China? All right, big to-do. Listen to this. Why the NBA and so many other companies cave into China. More American corporations, including a few having to do with sports, have joined a growing list of American companies who seem committed to appeasing the People's Republic of China. Let me remind you that the People's Republic of China is one of the most ungodly nations on the planet. Lots of human rights violations. I'll show you some of those tonight. Last week, in response to a blow-up between the NBA, National Basketball Association, and China, the sports publication Deadspin reported on a leaked internal ESPN memo. In it, the Disney-owned sports network, it's owned by Disney, mandated that its reporters avoid any discussion of tensions surrounding the NBA, China, and Hong Kong, and instead focus on related basketball issues. Now, you know what's happening in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's desperately trying to get its freedom. It's desperately trying to break away from Chinese authoritarian rule, and it wants to be a democracy, and so it's trying to pull away, and of course, China is raining down on them. In other words, a network that goes out of its way every year to celebrate Gay Pride Month has forbidden commentators from even talking about actual human rights abuses. That news came as Blizzard, an e-gaming company behind the uber-popular video game World of Warcraft, suspended a professional gamer from its international tournament and docked his prize money after he shouted, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times," in a post-match interview. The gamer, Nig Wan Chung, is a native of Hong Kong, but his actions, according to the company, violated the rule against gamers, bringing Blizzard into disrepute. This article writer says, I'm glad that more than a few public figures and politicians were willing to call out these companies for their cowardice, including Senators Marco Rubio and Rick Scott. To recap this story, though, when the general manager of the Houston Rockets expressed his support for Hong Kong in a tweet, China went berserk, banning the NBA from a state TV and ditching NBA-related sponsorships. Facing the loss of a couple billions of dollars or so, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver expressed regret that Daryl Morey's tweet offended the league's friends and fans in China. Players then tripped all over themselves to talk about how complicated the situation was, even while lavishing praise on China and their fans. Even worse, the league's attempt to eliminate any non-approved opinions has now even moved into the stands. Fans in Washington, D.C. had their pro-Hong Kong signs confiscated. This is in a free America. Listen, while fans with similar signs, and get this, the Philadelphia 76ers game were kicked out. And in case it's not obvious, their mascot name refers to 1776, our freedom, the same thing Hong Kong's trying to get. The league's actions, and especially their unwillingness to make any kind of moral stand here, are in stark contrast to the convicting moral clarity back in 2016. When NBA threatened to boycott the state of North Carolina and even canceled an all-star game over the so-called bathroom bill. So North Carolina said that if you're a woman, you should go to a woman's bathroom. If you're a man, you should go to a man's bathroom. Does that sound unreasonable to you? Well, the NBA wanted to cancel. They actually canceled an all-star game there. So I'm going to read a little more, but let me put my take in here. I don't do this often. So let me get it right. The NBA supports gay rights and will cancel games in states that don't because gays have rights. The NBA supports China, one of the worst countries for human rights and human trafficking in the world. This is the human rights map, the risk of it. The red is China. Let me get my pointer out of there for those of you that want to know. That's China. It's one of the worst countries for human rights on the planet. They kill and maim people by the hundreds of thousands. Not to mention the fact that China also is one of the largest human trafficking nations on the planet. And so this is China, and the NBA is defending them. So let me get it right. So they support gay rights, the NBA. They support China, which is one of the worst countries on the planet. And the NBA does not support the freedom of speech in China or in the United States, trying to take signs away from fans and trying to stymie one of their own who is talking on a tweet. So the NBA to me stands for the National Baloney Association. It's actually absolutely baloney. In other words, the NBA will boycott North Carolina over bathrooms, but will morally hem and haw and say it's complicated when it comes to China's practices of harvesting organs, imprisoning and otherwise persecuting religious minority groups, and forcing abortions on women. Again, the NBA should probably be renamed the NCA, the National Cowardice Association. In direct contrast, the city of Prague suspended its sister city's relationship with Beijing, risking Chinese investment in the Czech Republic. The mayor's political party explained why on Facebook. He said, "We are a country of free people. We refuse to bow to such an authoritarian regime that is responsible for re-education camps. They take people to camps and re-educate them that they have to be communists." Why is it that these professional sports associations, broadcasting networks, and so many other companies often line up with the communist China in their virtue signaling? Well, listen to the last part. It's because, like China, they see human beings as expendable compared to their real priorities. For China, it's the party. For these companies, it's profit. Both are willing to sacrifice humans on the altars of their false gods. And that's exactly what happens in China. So we're watching America. America's greed is really pushing everything out, all of our morals out the window. Let me give you a little bit about Israel and the Golan Heights. An interesting thing about the Golan Heights came out this week. What the Golan Heights can teach us about peace for Israel. Israeli wine has taken the world by storm, and some of the very best comes from the Golan Heights. Similarly, the Gaza Strip during the pre-Islamic era, when it was still mostly populated by Jews, produced wines to compete with the finest wines in the Byzantine Empire. So where is Gaza today? Sadly, it has become a place of squalor, unemployment, and a haven for terrorists, while the Golan has transformed into a place of life and productivity. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is this, and I'll summate what they're saying. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, what happened was either in an exchange of money or in some type of negotiation, the then Prime Minister of Israel made a deal with Bashar al-Assad. and he bought the Golan. The Golan was contested for a long, long time. So the Golan was either bought or made some type of deal. And what happened was, it used to be a no man's land. It was about 30, 40 miles where it was a no man's land. It was the Syrian troops were up on top of it. They had bunkers everywhere, and they fire down missiles on the Sea of Galilee. Well, once Israel got control of the Golan, there was nothing there. Eucalyptus trees and desert really on the top of a mountain. Once Israel got control of it, they started to produce immediately. That land started to produce immediately. Wealthy Jews from U.S., Russia, and Canada and Europe bought up parts of the Golan, and they started immediately to take it and transform it. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, Syria and the Golan fell under a French mandate first. Then, following the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Syria built those fortifications in the western Golan. But in the final days of the Six-Day War of 1967, after having defeated Egypt and Jordan, Israel turned its attention to Syria. And Syria somehow, maybe Bashar al-Assad, gave, because of money, the Golan back to them. Never been contested again. And they started to advance, the IDF started to advance up the steep slopes of the Golan. The Syrians fled, and Israel put the Golan under military administration until that time when they probably bought it. Today, the Golan under Israeli control is no longer a no man's land. It's been developed by Israel to be one of the most productive areas in the entire Middle East, in produce, in real estate values, in commerce, and in recreation. And what this is saying is this: what would happen if Gaza allowed Israel to come in? It would change that totally over. So Israeli occupation, if you want to put it that way, is really something that's going to build everybody up. It's something that's going to help them, but we still see the resistance going there. Speaking of Israel, I hate to bring these two pictures together, but I will. Smoke screening, Israel's false friends. Smoke screening, the false pretense of friendship towards Israel, is a common practice. Practitioners include U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, former U.S. President Barack Obama, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Smoke screening is a widespread activity in both politics and society. Israel is regularly subjected to smoke screening. And what is it? Well, Sanders is a super smoke screener. He claims he is 100% pro-Israel and says Israel has every right in the world to exist in peace and security and not be subjected to terrorist attacks. Let me tell you why he says that. Because his Democratic base, most Jews in America are Democrats. He also says the U.S. must be more even-handed in how it approaches the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He implies that the U.S. should avert its eyes from a genocide promoting Hamas, the largest Palestinian Islamic movement, and from Palestinian terror attacks supported by financial rewards from the Palestinian Authority. So what Sanders is doing is he's actually pro-Palestinian, and he's not pro-Israeli. He's just saying that, probably for votes. And that's pretty shocking that a politician would say something just for votes. But he's doing that for votes. And basically, he has someone running his campaign right now who's an anti-Semite. She's actually someone who is part of Hamas. She supports Hamas and supports Islamic Jihad. And by the way, Sanders is a Jew. You go figure it out. Sanders has said the Palestinians deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. He does not explain how people who are 90% anti-Semitic might merit that dignity and respect. Sanders' smoke screening of Israel warrants a full article on its own. Another major smoke screener toward Israel was Barack Obama. While President of the United States, he visited Israel in March 2013. He said at the Jerusalem Convention Center, quote, "I bring with me the support of the American people and the friendship that binds us together." He added, "As the president of the country that you can count on as your greatest friend, I am confident you can help us find the promise in these days that lie ahead." Now, his speech was probably about 400 pages long. It's probably about 40 pages long. He spoke about 10 pages of it. So I'm going to give you the whole 10 pages. Ready for the rest of it? Blah, 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 blah. It's all smoke screening. Because when Netanyahu came to America twice, he snubbed him. He would not meet with him. First president ever not to meet with an ally. And so we watched him do that over and over again. In December 2016, one of his last acts as president, Obama had the U.S. abstain from voting on a major anti-Israeli UN Security Council motion. The proposal demanded an immediate halt to all settlement construction in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So the UN said Israel has to stop making any construction in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Normally, we would vote against that. What he did, he made us stand down. When we stood down, first time ever we've done this to Israel, it passed. And a censure came to Israel from the UN because we stood down. Obama was not a friend. Alan Dershowitz, American law expert, said this: President Obama's decision on the way out to allow the United Nations to condemn Israel for occupying the Western Wall, the holiest place in Judaism, the Jewish Quarter, Hebrew University, the Hadassah Hospital bypass road, was absolutely abominable. And also German Chancellor Angela Merkel. She's a Christian Democrat. I'm not so sure that that is not an oxymoron. Matter of fact, I'll say that a little bit later. She has said that Israel's security is part of Germany's national ethos, but it's really not. She's gone against Israel in almost every vote in the UN. All right, so let me tell you a little bit more as we go a little bit further on here. China shows off the world's first stealth bomber. This thing is a drone bomber, first stealth drone bomber. This thing is nothing that like America has. It has developed the world's first stealth drone capable of flying for extended periods of time and hitting targets with extreme precision, completely undetected. The craft, named Sharp Sword, is part of a new generation of unmanned combat air vehicles and is thought to be capable of evading current U.S. defense systems. It was unveiled at China's National Day Parade on October 1st, when President Xi Jinping declared that no force can stop the Chinese people and the Chinese nation forging ahead. The craft is similar in appearance to the Predator drone used by the U.S. since 1995, but its wing design and the concealment of components like its exhaust gives it enhanced stealth capabilities. So I bring that all up to you for this reason. We know in Revelation it talks about the kings of the East will come over in the last days during tribulation, especially in the war of Armageddon. The kings of the East will come and they will go against Israel. They will actually march to the Israeli valleys, Jehoshaphat Valley. And we also know that, and I've told you this before about the Thucydides effect. I know somebody's pushing somebody saying the what effect? Thucydides was a philosopher 335 BC in Greece. He said, but at that time Athens was ruling Greece and pretty much part of their known world in the Mediterranean. And he said, whenever a country is ruling or a city-state is ruling, there'll always be others that are coming up, the second ones, and they'll always try to go against that one. They'll mount up and go against it. And they'll usually succeed because that nation or city that's been on top gets lax in its military. It gets lax in its ability to know that it's the ruler of the world. And every time, now he said it in 335 BC, for the rulers of the world that took over, absolutely happened to every single one of them that they had something that was a second in command type or a second in power type of nation rise up. China and Russia are threatening America as being the superpower of the world. China is rising up. While Obama was sitting on his hands and doing nothing for our military, China was pumping everything they could into their military. And they have now some sophisticated things. This is not reverse engineered. This is not something that came from America and they reverse engineered it. This is something on their own engineers did. It is capable of flying at supersonic speeds unbidden, without being detected. It's capable of hitting any city in the United States with a nuclear weapon, any one of them. So we're sitting on the virtual edge of what's going on. I thought I'd bring that to you just to warm you up tonight. All right, let me give you a little bit more about China and tell you a little bit with religion what's going on there. So China is in complete control of its country and its people. It's war on the Bible. If you can't ban it, alter it. A recent article at World Magazine reported how the Chinese language app called We Devote recently surpassed 10 million downloads. So in China, there are now more Christians underground. There's a national Christian church, that's baloney, but there's more Christians underground than there are communists in China. It is very, very quickly growing. Christianity is spreading all over China. So We Devote is a Bible reading and devotional app known for its aesthetically pleasing design and respect for copyright laws, which is a rarity in China, by the way. The month after its launch, China's biggest app store listed We Devote as recommended app right on its homepage. Well, the Communist Party's crackdown on Christianity in recent years meant that both the app and its developers faced increasing government scrutiny. Eventually, they were given a choice: shut this app down or face jail time. Well, a third option, transferring ownership of the app to a Chinese-based company. Can you imagine? Provided a temporary respite from the ultimatum, but the government has now banned We Devote from Chinese app stores. The government shutdown of We Devote is part of a disturbing trend. Last year, China banned online Bible sales. Of course, that doesn't mean Bibles aren't available in China. Chinese publishers continue to print Chinese-language Bibles. Some are exported, of course, but plenty remain in China. That's the good news. The bad news is that very soon, at least spiritually speaking, Chinese language copies of the Bible may not be worth the paper they're printed on. According to The Guardian, the Communist Party has plans for retranslating and annotating the Bible in order to establish correct understanding of the text. Correct understanding will include reinforcing the primacy of the Communist Party. As one pastor told The Guardian, the Chinese Communist Party wants to be God of China and the Chinese people. But according to the Bible, only God is God. The reality on the ground is this: the government is scared of the churches, it's scared of Christianity, and it's cracking down on it. Any attempt to control and rewrite the Bible is an admission by the Communist Party that it's failing to eradicate Christianity. What's happened in China is every time the Chinese government comes, the Communist government comes and tries to shut down churches or people, they step on that fire, and the little fire spreads everywhere. So Christianity is going absolutely wild in China. By the way, there are between 100 and 150 plus million Christians in China. Since they cannot eliminate Christianity, the party's goal is to pervert it, creating a version of Christianity that doesn't threaten the party's claim of ultimate authority. Anyone who believes that only God is God is a threat to the Communist Party and its leader, Xi Jinping. So it's definitely, persecution is definitely there. I don't like to, I'd like to put people up here that I like looking at. I'm not really crazy about putting people up on these screens that I'm not crazy looking at. But I will. Beto O'Rourke. Now, I'm going to say something to you, and you can take your infer. I have a certain name for him that I can't say publicly, and here's what it sounds like. It sounds like Rourke, but it starts with a D. Because his policies are very, very dorky. Listen, Beto O'Rourke says he'd revoke tax-exempt status of religious groups that oppose same-sex marriages. So a tax-exempt status, what does that mean? Well, it means I'm a 501c3. Do I need it? No. But you may need it because some people who donate to Mark Correll Ministries can get tax credit for that. And so that's every church. Every church has tax exemption. They don't have to pay taxes because they're a church, they're a nonprofit. He wants to take that away if we don't capitulate to LGBTQ, whatever. Listen to what he says. Texans comment at CNN Equality Town Hall hit a sore spot in a simmering culture war and drew allegations of intolerance. Beto O'Rourke, already pushing a ban on assault weapons, added Thursday night to the list of issues sure to alienate conservative voters if he makes it to the general election, which, by the way, he's not going to, by vowing to revoke the tax-exempt status of churches that oppose same-sex marriage. The former El Paso congressman made the comments during a CNN town hall devoted to LGBTQ issues. His stance toward conservative religious institutions was far more aggressive than those of most rivals in the Democratic presidential nomination. I'll give you another article on this in a moment. But basically, he said there can be no reward, no benefit, no tax break for anyone that denies the full human rights and the full civil rights of every single one of us. By the way, the Democrats were not crazy that he said that, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Next article goes right along with it. Democrats plan to target churches opposed to LGBT rights laid bare. The Democratic Party formally came out of the closet last week at CNN Town Hall. Joe Biden almost took a lunge at Anderson Cooper at one point and made it clear, if he wasn't already, that they have chosen their side in the culture war. The gay marriage debate is not about equal rights or tolerance or anything like that. It's about winning. By the way, speaking of culture wars, some of you may have known Pastor Armon, my associate pastor. He came up a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, and we did some taping. He has something called Cafe Conversations that goes out on the web, and he interviewed me about the culture wars and about churches. It's really worth watching. It's a pretty amazing thing that came out. We're getting a lot of hits on it. I think it's on YouTube right now, and it's on the website, so you may want to see that. But anyway, this is not a surprise in some ways. After all, same-sex marriage was only legalized across the United States in 2015, and already we've got bakers, photographers, and other professionals being driven out of business. Now, let me say something about that. In 2015, you didn't have an LGBTQ agenda. Now they have an agenda. Once the government gave them the right, they went wild, and they're doing it all over America. Listen to it. There's LGBTQ education being installed in schools right across our country. Drag queens reading stories to children in public libraries. Transgender 9-year-olds showing up on CNN to wild applause, and the warm support of Democrat who should be old enough to know better. When Christians warned that this sort of thing was inevitable, the LGBT crowd called us liars back in 2015. They said, no, we'd never do that. Beto O'Rourke is like the kid at the supper table who looks at his parents with innocent eyes and says, right in front of the guests, but I thought you said you hated it when they come over. The fact is, it's true that the fact that it is true does not make it any less embarrassing. So when Beto blurted out that it was his view that religious institutions and churches who hold to the traditional view of marriage should be punished by losing their tax-exempt status, the left went furious. Now, why would the left go furious? Not because they disagree with him, mind you. They just don't think it's a smart thing to say right now, and it really isn't. It's the dumbest thing they could say right now. They want to have it one thing at a time, Beto, one thing at a time. Because it's not the time. You wait until after the election before you betray people you want to vote for you. And not the place either. You say that sort of thing at New York cocktail party, not on CNN where some of the rubes might hear you. Beto's view isn't entirely new to Democrats. It echoes, for example, then Solicitor General Donald Verrill's concession during his oral argument in Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015, that the tax-exempt status of Christian colleges and universities who hold to traditional views of marriage was going to be an issue. He related us having our views to the Nazis. Now watch, he says this, and he says, we were strong with them during the Nuremberg trials. We need to be strong with Christians about their views. Are you kidding me? He goes on to say this. He says, I suspect this issue and O'Rourke's framing of it will lead to increased turnout of evangelicals, I hope so, in states that matter to Democrats, such as Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. O'Rourke's comment may quickly fall out of the national news cycle, but it won't be forgotten among churches, religious organizations, and religious voters. Journalists should ask O'Rourke and every other Democratic candidate how this policy position would affect conservative black churches who do believe in one man, one woman marriage, mosques who also believe in that, and other Islamic organizations, and Orthodox Jewish communities, among others. It's difficult to understand how Democratic candidates can be for those communities, advocating tolerance all along the way, if they're actively lobbying to put them out of business. Let me give you one last one on this. I think it's the last one. I hope it is. No, it's almost. Democrat candidate pushes LGBT activism front and center. So don't blame me for writing yet another article on LGBT issues. Blame Beto, or Booker, or Biden, or Buttigieg, or Warren. The Democratic presidential candidates are pushing this agenda, and quite aggressively at that. They're the ones talking about what the Bible allegedly says and does not say about homosexuality. They're the ones threatening our religious liberties. They're the ones wanting to indoctrinate our children. All we're doing is responding. They're the ones telling us we don't have the right to our biblically based beliefs. They're the ones pushing a radical revisionist agenda. They're the ones telling hundreds of millions of people that the explicit teachings of Scripture must be ignored and that the church and synagogue have been wrong on these issues for 2,000 years. If you'd rather not read about this in the news every day, don't blame me, blame them. An aggressive agenda came knocking at our doors, at the doors of our children's schools and universities, at the doors of our places of business, at the doors of our courts, at the doors of our entertainment, at the doors of our social media, at the doors of our churches. How could we not respond? How could we not push back? I first became burdened, this article writer says, to address LGBT issues and activism in 2004, with this motto soon rising in my heart, and it's a great motto. Reach out and resist, meaning reach out to people with compassion, but resist the agenda with courage. That's a great motto. We want to reach out to LGBT. We want to reach out to them. We don't hate them. We're not against them as persons, but we have to go against and resist the agenda that they're trying to shove down our throats. That meant that as much as I cared for individuals and reached out to them with compassion, there would be a fierce resistance as well. And I'm doing the same thing, by the way. And immediately became clear to me that those who came out of the closet, and I've said this before, wanted to put us in the closet. Those who had the temerity to resist the goals of LGBT activism would be vilified and maligned in the strongest, vilest terms. These radical activists would tolerate no dissent, their unspoken mantra being, we will intimidate and we will manipulate until you capitulate. And basically that's what's happened. Basically we're now being blamed for hate crimes. So here's the order of the day. Sadly, the capitulation became the order of the day. Political leaders have caved, social leaders have caved, religious leaders have caved. We dare not offend the activists. We dare not be viewed as haters and bigots. There are more important battles to fight, these leaders reasoned. So we'll practice appeasement and live to fight another day. But this strategy never works. Since the more ground we surrender, the more ground we have to yield. The goalposts keep moving. And in America, the goalposts have moved a lot. When it comes to the present state of LGBT activism, it is now a presidential issue, front and center. It should never have been a presidential issue. Democrats' candidates' positions. That's why, in just the last week, Senator Cory Booker quoted the Bible to explain why it was wrong for a Catholic school to forbid the formation of an LGBTQ groups. Senator Elizabeth Warren joked that a man who opposes same-sex marriage would have a hard time finding a woman to marry. I don't even know if that's funny. I don't even know if that's a joke. Mayor Pete said that when it comes to opposing LGBT rights, despite the importance of religious liberty, it is also, I'm quoting, the case that any freedom we honor in this country has limits when it comes to harming other people. Former Vice President Biden called for the passage of the Democrats' Equality Act, enforcement of civil rights laws. Now they're putting us that we're violating somebody's civil rights because we have a certain belief. You do not violate somebody's civil rights because you have a certain belief. Monitoring of hate groups, teaching children from an early age to accept same-sex couples and transgenders. Remember, he's talking about teaching your children. And candidate Beto O'Rourke, or as you know what I call him, said emphatically again in the context of LGBT rights, there can be no reward, no benefit, no tax break for anyone or any institution or any organization in America that denies the full human rights and the full civil rights of every single one of us. So as president, he says, we are going to make that a priority. We're going to stop those who are infringing upon the human rights of our fellow Americans. He's going to stop you and he's going to stop me. Beto, you're going to have a big time trying to stop me. Now let me tell you this. Here's my take. You ready for my take? It's getting to the tipping point that, and I'm telling you, I'm going to say this, and this will go all over the country and the world actually. The term Christian Democrat is an oxymoron. I don't know how you can be both anymore. So it's time for Bible believers to abandon the Democratic Party. Amen. I said it. Pastor, you're being political. You bet I'm being political. Amen. You know why I'm being political? Because they're trying to be spiritual. And they're not. They stay off quoting the Bible. I'll stay off going against them. They need to do what they're doing. Come on. So if you're listening to me tonight and you're a Democrat, I promise you your party's changing. Amen. That's not the party your father knew. It's not the party of President Kennedy. It is a party of evil. It's the Democratic Party. Democratic Party. And again, that's pretty bold. I'm going to say it, and I stand by it. All right, here you go. InterVarsity religious freedom prevail. You want some good news? Here it is. The University of Iowa learns a lesson. Back in February, federal judge Stephanie Rose ruled that University of Iowa could not strip recognition from business leaders in Christ for requiring leaders to follow traditional Christian teachings on sexuality and morality. So she said, I'm sticking up for the Christians. You cannot kick them out of any fraternities. You can't kick them out of any of having a society on the campus. Rose, an appointee of President Obama of all, didn't find a problem with the university's human rights policy, which the university claimed the Christian group violated, but she did think a problem that the university applied the policy inconsistently in a way that violated students' free speech rights. Did the University of Iowa learn their lesson? No. Last week, the university officials found themselves back in Rose's courtroom. Despite the very clear ruling from February, university officials deregistered InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in June. They kicked them out for the same reason. So I'm not sure what the university expected, but in the last 7 months, Judge Rose has not changed her opinion about what the Constitution requires. In fact, this time she let them have it. She wrote in her opinion, if university officials proceeded to broaden enforcement of the human rights policy in the name of uniformity, applying extra scrutiny to Christian groups in the process, while at the same time continuing to allow some groups to operate in violation of the policy and formalizing an exemption for fraternities and sororities. The court does not know how a reasonable person could have concluded that this was acceptable. Back in her February ruling, Rose pointed out how the Chinese Students and Scholars Association limit membership to Chinese students. And the Iowa Hacapellas, a Capella group, only accept women. Yet neither of these groups were derecognized for violating the human rights policy, nor were fraternities or sororities or LGBTQ student groups required to open their leadership policies. Just about the only group the policy applied to, according to university officials, were Christian groups that uphold traditional Christian teachings about sexuality. She correctly identified the double standard clearly at work, which can be summed up as some freedom of speech and association is freer than others. Frustrated with their stubbornness and determined to not have them back revisit in her court for the same reason, Rose decided to hit the officials where it really hurts, their wallets. She fined them $10,000 each. So there's a Obama appointee who stuck up for Christian principles. That's pretty awesome. All right, I don't have a picture of him. You should know what he looks like by now, but I'm going to talk about the Pope. The Pope is interviewed by Eugenio Scalfari. Mr. Scalfari is the founder and the editor of new magazine L'Espresso. He has interviewed Pope Francis in the past. One interview caused a stir when Mr. Scalfari stated Pope Francis did not believe in an eternal hell. Now Mr. Scalfari states that Pope Francis did not believe the man Jesus was God. Somehow Jesus abstained his divinity when he became a man. Now listen closely, because this is a 2nd century heresy that was thrown out of the church, and it's back through this pope. Listen to it. In an interview published in the Italian journal La Repubblica Tuesday, Eugenio Scalfari said the pontiff, those who, as it happened many times with me, have the luck of meeting him, he likes him by the way, and speaking to him with the greatest cultural intimacy, know that Pope Francis conceives Christ as Jesus of Nazareth, man, not God incarnate. Once incarnate, Jesus ceases to be a God and becomes a man until his death on the cross. So what they believe, it's Docetism, it's called. It's a 2nd century heresy. They believe that Christ died as a man, and as he went into the tomb, he resurrected as the Son of God. That is a heresy. It's abomination. And the Pope, who's sitting over 2.5 billion people, now believes that Jesus, when he was on earth, was not the Son of God. He is the Son of God. Matter of fact, Peter said, you are the Son of God. He said, flesh and blood has not revealed that to you, but my Father which is in heaven. All right, speaking of God, let me give you one last thing. This is kind of exciting. So anybody know what that is? Anybody know what that is? That's called a shin. It's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And they all have meanings. This one means peace and love and protection. When we talk about the topography, and you've heard me tell you this, of Israel, this is Mount Zion. This is the topography of Mount Zion. If you talk about it, let me show you something here. So there are 3 valleys that encircle Mount Zion. This is the Temple Mount. This is on Mount Zion. This right here you can see is the Kidron Valley. Mount of Olives is over here. The Central Valley is also called the Tyropoeon Valley, or the Valley of the Cheesemakers. And this is the Hinnom Valley. We get our Gehenna from it. And so this is where actually Judas killed himself. So this forms a shin. So people know, when I take people to Israel, I tell them, listen, Zion is blessed by God because it has that shin on it. Well, there's something else that was recently found. I talked to you about the Golan Heights today, and this is the topography of Israel to the north. Here's the Golan Heights. It is called the Golan Heights because it's mountainous. That's Syria to this side, and you see Lebanon to this side. You have the Sea of Galilee, fed by the Jordan River, which goes all the way down to Jerusalem. Now, right over here is the Judean foothills. They go all the way down to Jerusalem. So there were some aerial shots being taken of it the other day. Before I get there, let me show you this. Speaking of letters, this is what's called the Tetragrammaton. Hebrews read from right to left. So you read Yud, He, Vav, He. It's YHW or VH. Our English translation is this or this. So when we talk about Yahweh or Jehovah, Hebrew is a mouth-to-ear language. They don't put vowels in. So the name of God could actually be Yahweh or Jehovah. We don't know. Jehovah could be the name. Yahweh could be the name. But I want you to know the Tetragrammaton. This letter, the Yud, the He, the Vav, and the He. So, talking about topography, I'm going someplace. Recently, aerial views of the Judean foothills right above Jerusalem showed this. God's name in the mountains. There it is. That's Tetragrammaton. You can see it right there. And as a matter of fact, enhanced, these are the actual ridges. So when you see it, listen, God is all over that place. And I don't know about you, I can tolerate a whole lot of bad news as long as I have the good news. Somebody say amen. That's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers if they come. If you're here for the very first time, would you just signal that to us by raising your hand? Anybody here for the first time? Your very first time with us. I thought I saw some visitors coming in. Anybody shy and doesn't want to raise their hand? Raise your hand. Okay, I guess not.